When a team's first coming together, or there's changes happening, or there's cracks starting to show in the culture, a team vision workshop is a really great way to bring the team together and get them all on the same page. But it's one thing to set a team vision, it's another thing to create a plan on how to get there. So in this video, I'm going to share with you a 5-step process that I use with teams when they're really wanting to get on the same page and set some direction. It's not just about the vision or where they're going, but it's also the steps on how they're going to get there. Hi, I'm Kerry Price. I'm the founder of the Facilitators Network, and I use the principles of deliberate generosity to make sure that no meeting or workshop is ever wasted. I've been a professional facilitator for 20 odd years, and in that time I've led thousands of meetings, workshops and community conversations. Now I help other trainers and facilitators do it well too. At one point in my career, I got a bit of a reputation for working with teams who were in all shapes of awful. You know, teams who were having stand-up arguments in the hallway, teams that just couldn't agree on anything or were working in silos and just not getting things done in an effective way. The invitation was always for me to come in and reset the vision and get everyone working on the same page. And this was usually with groups who didn't necessarily want to be there. So in this video, I'm going to share with you the 5-step process that I walked teams through. It's not just about setting the vision, but how do we make that vision a reality? Step 1 is about creating the big picture vision, or deciding as a team, what does a great team look like? Now you can craft that question based on what is important to the leader, the manager, the CE, whoever's bringing you in. But I would most often use what does a great team look like, or what does a high performing team look like, as a starting point to focus the discussion. Now how we shape up what a great team looks like might look different in different contexts. But most often I would start the conversation by using picture cards. I'd lay picture cards on the floor, invite people to choose a picture that represents what a great team looks like to them, and then I would get people sharing those descriptions into the room. As people were sharing what a great team looked like to them, I'd be summarising that on a flip chart or a whiteboard. They'd say things like, oh, everyone's really respectful, or we know exactly what our job is and we're focused on the task at hand, or we really care for our teammates outside of what's going on at work. Different things come from different people in different ways, but for all of the teams that I've worked with, usually what a great team looks like looks the same for everyone in the end. This is just about hearing people's voices and getting their words and their language onto the page. Step 2 is to identify how well the team currently measures up against their own picture of success. So once they've decided this is what a great team looks like, and they've got all this beautiful, colourful language on the page around what they're trying to achieve, the second step is, so how well are you doing currently? And this is always a telling part of the process. Usually how I facilitate this is I draw up a continuum that looks a little bit like this. It's usually between 1 and 10, and at every point on the scale I have a little bit of a description. So 10 is we are absolutely nailing it, like totally, that description of a great team, that is us 100% of the time. 8 is yeah, we usually measure up like that, like we do pretty well, there's always room for improvement, but really, if I measure us up against that picture of success, we're doing pretty blimmin' well. 6 is, on a good day that's us, but it's definitely not all the time, and there's definitely room to be more intentional and consistent about how we show up as a team. 4 is, oh, that's really not us. Like maybe occasionally we tick some boxes. I think we'd all like to be that kind of team, but we have a long way to go. And then 2 is, I'm not even convinced everyone in the team wants the team to look like this. There's some things going on that look nothing like that picture. So I create the continuum and I put it on a flip chart, and then I give everyone in the room a sticky dot and invite them to place their dot on the continuum based on how well they think they're currently measuring up as a team. And what's important here is it's not, oh, most of the team's doing well, but it's just one person, it's just Jim in accounts who's ruining it for everyone. No, we don't get to talk about people or personalities. This is a team sport. So as a team, how well do we think we're measuring up? Now, what's really interesting about this process is even in teams who are all shapes of awful and things aren't going well, people are really honest about how things are measuring up. And when I've been invited to run these workshops with teams who are really not doing well, people clustering their dots around 4 or 5, like, I'm not convinced we're doing well at all. Once everyone's placed their stickers on the continuum, I tend to make a statement around whose responsibility it is to change it. So I might notice some things like, isn't it interesting that we're all clustered together? Isn't it interesting that there's a spread? And then I say, here's the good news. Everybody in the room has the power to shift these dots. You all have the power to make changes in yourself that will shift the team further along the continuum. The bad news is everyone in this room is also responsible for doing that. You can't point the finger at other people in the team and say, if only Jim did. It's also your responsibility to make the changes required. Okay, so step 1 is creating the vision. What does a great team look like? Step 2 is how well are we currently measuring up as a team? Step 3 is about how do we need to be in order to shift these dots along the continuum. And as I introduce this part of the process, what I say to teams is, if we want to move our dots from 4 or 5 up to 9 or 10, there are a whole bunch of different things that we could do. But before we talk about what we need to do, let's talk about how we need to be in order to shift the dots. And when I talk about how do we need to be, it's about how do we need to be as a person? What characteristics do we need to bring to the room? What are the ways of being that we would really value as a team? To work through this process, I support the group to come up with a set of team values. And how I facilitate this is I start by saying to people, I want you to imagine that you have the power to create the team values on your own. I want you to imagine that if it was just up to you and you got to dictate the values that everybody was living by, what would those values be for you? Sometimes I give them a sheet of values or being words that they might browse through. Other times I let them come up with those words on their own. And I invite them to put one value or one way of being on a post-it note 5 times. So we end up with 5 being words on 5 separate post-it notes. I give people 5, 6, 8 minutes to work through that on their own, and then I start to facilitate the group conversation. And how that works is I invite the first person to share back into the room. So I might say, okay, Mark, when thinking about moving these dots along the continuum, what is one way of being that you think is important for the team? And Mark might say something like, I think it's important that we're being future focused. Awesome. Tell me a little bit about what future focus means to you. And I pop this post-it note up on the whiteboard and I take note of what future focused or the description that he's giving me around that. I then move to the next person in the team and I say, okay, Mary, if you were to give me one value or one way of being that you think is important for the team, what might that be? And Mary might say respectful. I say, thanks, Mary. Tell me a little bit about what respectful means to you. And as we go around the room, people are sharing in their words one by one, and I'm creating space for them to actually talk about what that word means to them. What we notice is that people use different words to describe the same kind of thing. So someone might say, team orientated, someone might say collaborative, someone might say cooperative, but actually their descriptions are the same. So as they feed back the words, I cluster them on the whiteboard so that we create themes around ways of being. Now, I've facilitated this process hundreds, if not thousands of times over the years, and every time, without fail, you end up with between 4 and 6 themes of words. So instead of arguing about the individual words in the cluster, what we do as a team is decide on the names of 4, 5 or 6 themes that everyone can agree to live by. Now, while every team is slightly different, almost always you'll end up with themes around how we think and make decisions, how we relate to others in the team, how we go about executing our work, and how we go about leading or influencing others. Sometimes there's a 5th or 6th one thrown in, but those are the groupings that usually show up. Step 4 is to describe how those values or those ways of being actually show up in action. So it's one thing for people to say, oh, we need to be respectful, or we need to be team orientated, or we need to be future focused. But what does that actually look like on a day-to-day basis? So once people have agreed on their themes for ways of being, I then put those themes onto different flip charts and I invite people in small groups to cluster around that page. They're then invited to do a couple of things. They need to think about, first of all, the actions that are happening within the team that really show that value in action. So those are the things that they want to continue doing. Then they think about the actions that actually, I know we said we're going to be respectful, but these are some things that are happening that are not that at all. And we put those behaviours into a section that says these are the actions we want to stop doing. And then lastly, I get them to think about what are some of the actions that are missing. If we were really going to be respectful, what are some of the actions we need to start doing as a team in order to be living those values day to day? Once everyone has gone from flip chart to flip chart, added behaviours in the start, stop and continue section, we then feed that back to the group so we can get a real sense of what we need to do in order to move along the continuum. Step 5 is to get commitment from the team. It's one thing to describe what a great team looks like. It's one thing to identify where they currently measure up. It's one thing to talk about values and how they want to be, and then the actions and the things they want to do. But if nobody's committed to following through, then the whole workshop has been a waste of time. And so before the workshop ends, I invite people to signal their commitment on a 5-finger scale. So 5 being, yeah, I'm really committed to this. Like, I get that other people in the team might not be, but I'm putting my hand up to say, I'm going to give this a really good shot. 4 might be, yeah, I'm committed to this in principle. I know I'm going to make mistakes and there's going to be times that maybe I don't show up as well as I could, but I'm committed to keep trying and I'm going to try and get it right as much as I can. Right through to 1, which is, nah, none of this makes sense. I'm not showing up for any of this. Now, what's really interesting about this process is that because as a team, they have decided on the vision and the values and the actions and behaviours that they need to start, stop and continue, it's really hard for someone at the end to go, yeah, nah, I'm not into this, because they're the ones who've shaped it up. So usually at the end of this workshop, you get a bunch of 5s, sometimes there's a 4. And now the onus is on the manager or the team leader to hold people accountable. Because it's one thing to have the workshop, but if there's nobody holding people accountable to what they're committed to, it's not effective over time. As you go through this process, there are going to be some people who are talking more than others. And if you're in a toxic team, there's going to be some people who perhaps don't feel safe to contribute in the way that would be helpful. So if you're really wanting to make the most of this workshop, you need to learn how to manage the really loud voices. In my next video, Effective Facilitation Techniques for Managing Loud Voices, I share 3 techniques that will help you share the air amongst all the participants so even the quiet people get a chance to speak. The link's in the description below. Go check it out.